to make sure that more Americans get to vote. Added to that is the way that over the course of our history, we've given voters more of a direct say in the outcome of elections, in the election of our leaders. We've come to trust voters to make their own decisions. That, colleagues, didn't always used to be the case. In the early days of our nation, aside from excluding women, people of color, and those without property from being able to vote, few elections were decided directly by the voters. U.S. senators, and in most cases, state governors, were elected indirectly by state legislatures. Individual voters elected their legislators, who then politicked, deliberated, and made the ultimate choice. The same was historically true of the Electoral College as formulated in the U.S. Constitution. Voters in the individual states voted for electors, who were then charged with selecting the final winner. The institution of the Electoral College, colleagues, was really the result of three factors present when our country was founded. First was this reluctance to trust individual voters to make the direct decisions as to who should be their leaders. Second were the necessary compromises needed to balance the interests of slave states and free states, large states and small states. Third was the fact that most people felt a stronger allegiance to their individual colony or state than to the nation as a whole. Colleagues, we have over time as a nation moved away from these features present at the founding. Most of us see ourselves as Americans first, citizens of a state second. We're obviously no longer divided between slave state and free. We've come increasingly to believe in the value of direct democracy. We elect our governors directly, as we do our U.S. senators, though it took 100 years to amend the Constitution to make that possible. Increasingly, we've come to view the Electoral College as a relic of an earlier time, having a purely ceremonial function. A group of 538 people would come together in Washington, D.C. after the election to put their ceremonial stamp of approval on the people's decision. There was no deliberation, just a recording of the votes from each state, the end result of which was confirmation of the popular vote. That's certainly how it was for me growing up, and I suspect it's the same for most of us here, at least those of us of a similar vintage as I. Yes, if we knew our history, we knew that there had been exceptions back in the 1800s, men with long beards named Rutherford B. Hayes and Benjamin Harrison, acceding to the presidency even though they'd lost the popular vote. Yes, it was theoretically still possible, but not anything that was really possible in the modern world. Of course, colleagues, that all changed abruptly in 2000, with Florida, hanging chads, contested votes, and a narrow victory in the state. And George W. Bush thereby becoming president despite losing the national vote by more than 500,000 votes. Then just 4 years later, John Kerry very nearly won the presidential election by dint of winning the Electoral College, despite having lost the popular vote. If Ohio had gone for Kerry, as it very nearly did, he would have won the Electoral College vote despite being handily defeated by Bush. The Electoral College would have given the presidency to the Democrat, even though most Americans had voted for the Republican. And of course, we all know what happened in 2016. Colleagues, it was around the time of the Bush-Kerry election that people began to talk about coming up with a way to make sure that the winner of the popular vote would win the election. A constitutional amendment was considered, but the process of amending our federal constitution is long, arduous, and uncertain. Remember, it took 100 years, from the early 1800s to the early 1900s, to give people the right to directly elect their senators. There's no reason to think that the same wouldn't be the case here. An alternative route was devised that had its roots right in the Constitution, based on the power that the Constitution gives to individual state legislatures, the absolute right to determine the manner of selection of its Electoral College electors. Over time, most states have decided to bind the decisions of their electors in a winner-takes-all manner. The electors of a particular state are bound to vote for whichever candidate received the most votes in the state's presidential election. A couple of states do it proportionally, but for the most part, that's how it's done. But it doesn't have to be that way. State legislatures have the constitutional right to decide that their state's electoral votes should be cast in favor of whoever wins the national vote. Of course, it would be foolish for an individual state to decide to do so in the absence of other states agreeing to join them in doing so. So the wise thing to do would be to band together with other states and do it as a group. Colleagues, that's precisely what Senate Bill 870, the National Popular Vote Compact, does. It says that once enough state legislatures, those that control 270 Electoral College votes, i.e. more than half of the votes in the Electoral College, once they have agreed to enter into the compact to direct their Electoral College votes on behalf of the winner of the popular vote, the compact goes into effect, and henceforth, their electors are bound to do so. The Electoral College, in effect, then goes back to having the ceremonial function of confirming the national vote.